and welcome to SCG Global Spin. Your host today is Steve Tugend, with guests Alexis Glascock and Jonathan McCardle.
Well, thank you for joining us today for SCG Legal's Global Spin webcast. As a reminder, SCG Legal is a worldwide network of 112 independent law firms. It was founded in 1989 and is now ranked in Chambers Global as well as Canada and Asian Pacific. Our organization supports more than 12,000 attorneys who work in firms that house legal, regulatory, and government relations practices. Our members serve clients in major commercial centers, as well as in capitals in more than 56 countries and in every U.S. state capital, as well as in the District of Columbia. SCG Legal's Global Spin webcast series offers member firms and their clients timely and relevant information on a diverse range of issues affecting political and regulatory matters across all industries and most countries around the world. My name's Steve Tugend. I'm the chair of the Government Affairs Practice at Kegler, Brownhill, and Ritter in Columbus, Ohio, where I lead a group of lobbyists at the federal, state, and local levels of government. We represent clients that range from Fortune 1000 companies to startups, as well as governments and nonprofits. I also have the honor of serving on the SCG Legal Board of Directors. Today, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the U.S. political landscape with our guests, Alexis Glascock and Jonathan McCardle. Now, first I'll introduce Alexis. She's of counsel with the Fenimore Craig Law Firm in Phoenix, Arizona. She worked both in private practice and in senior staff positions in the state and federal levels of government. She served both as counsel to the president of the Arizona Senate and as the assistant to the general counsel of the legislative council there in that state. Additionally, Alexis has garnered experience at the federal level during her tenure with the majority leadership of the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress. Now, in private practice, Alexis has lobbied for a wide range of corporate and nonprofit clients, including the American Heart Association, the Arthritis Foundation, the Arizona Association of Healthcare Plans, the Arizona Cardinals, the Arizona Uniform Laws Commission, and the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. Now, turning to Jonathan McCardle, Jonathan is a partner with Featherston, Wiley & Klein in Albany, New York. He's represented private corporations and nonprofit clients in the areas of racing and gaming, financial services, law enforcement, as well as alcohol beverage control. Jonathan was actually recently recognized by Super Lawyers magazine as a rising star for his knowledge and experience related to administrative law. In addition, a couple years ago, he was acknowledged by City and State magazine and Albany's 40 Under 40 and by the Albany Times Union as a part of the next emerging class of young lobbyists. Alexis and Jonathan, thanks for joining us today. We're looking for a really good discussion about politics, the election, what's at stake in November. This program is designed to share with SCG member law firms and their clients perspectives in these areas. So turning to the task at hand and the subject at hand, I want to ask you just generally how things are going in your state. We'll start with you, Alexis. How are things in Arizona?
Well, Steve, things are moving along fairly well in Arizona. In terms of just the overall state, let me just give you some basic information. As you know, we're located in the southwest part of the United States, and Arizona's population has been growing really rapidly relative to the rest of the country. Really since 2010, it's now at a population of 7.387 million people. And from 2012 to 2015, during that period, We were the seventh largest increase in the country year after year. The largest city is Phoenix, and it's the capital of Arizona, and it has a population of 4.51 million, and is the 10th largest city. And that's kind of surprising to people. They don't realize typically how large Arizona is as a state, but it's really growing quickly. And we've seen a rapid increase in people moving to Arizona from all over the country. The population growth is due to people exiting California, in part because of high taxes, high cost of living. Many people have to commute 2 hours to and from work because they can't find affordable housing. And then in addition to that, you've got all the wildfires, and that has only exacerbated the situation, the difficulty that many people find living in California. But we also get a great influx from the Midwest, a lot of people retiring, as well as people from the East Coast. And now with the pandemic, that's really only increased. People from California have come over, rented houses during the entire COVID period because we have a smaller population relative to California, and the weather is really very conducive to being outdoors most of the year. So as a result of that, our economy is doing great. Real estate is on fire. It was busy before, and now it's just booming. There are not enough workers to help with construction, not only of houses and apartment buildings, but also we've seen a big influx of manufacturing and other companies from both Northern and Southern California. So overall, the economic trends, despite the downturn in tourism and the hotel industry because of COVID, the other aspects of the economy have really offset that.
Well, Jonathan, what about you? How are things in New York going?
You know, New York's in a little bit of a different situation as compared to Arizona. Right now, our population's about 19.4, 19.5 million people in it. And we've actually experienced some population declines as of recently, people fleeing the state for some of the same reasons that Alexa just mentioned. However, our state government remains to be in firm control of the Democratic Party. Our governor, Andrew Cuomo, is in his third term. He's enjoyed some strong national recognition for his COVID response and daily briefings that he held in the early days of the pandemic. Looking at our state legislature, we have a state Senate and a state assembly. Our state Senate recently flipped to Democratic control after being with the Republicans for nearly a century. And our assembly is really dominated by members from the New York City region and has been in Democratic control, and they've enjoyed a large majority for several years now. What's new with New York and what is everyone talking about here? It's really our budget shortfall. We had a very delicate balance before the pandemic hit, and the pandemic really blew the lid off it, if you will. And we have about $170 billion state budget, and we're looking at a $16 billion shortfall right now. So that's a pretty significant gap that will have to be closed. The governor stated recently, as late as this week, that it would likely take a cut in state spending along with additional new taxes and some terms of new borrowing approaches to satisfy that gap. Previously, we had been optimistic that the next round of stimulus from Congress would provide some state and local relief that would help our budget get back on pace. But as everybody knows, it seems unlikely we're going to get a deal here in the next 30 days or so before the election. And the governor's taking a wait and see approach. As to the presidential race, that is one of the topics of the day. Our governor has also been mentioned as a possible attorney general candidate in Joe Biden's administration, should he be successful. He does have a background and served under the Clinton administration that would kind of be a good fit for him. So a lot of insiders are speculating on how that would shake up our state government and what it would look like. Another current trend that is facing the state of New York is the census count. And we're really concerned about the possibility of dropping another congressional seat because of our population decline. So right now we have 29 congressional seats, 2 in the Senate, 27 in the House. and we want to continue to see that maintained or increased. But I think the reality is right now, there are some people leaving the state, and we're trying to do what we can to address those issues.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. And you did mention how your governor is a potential candidate if Joe Biden should be elected president, and he's a governor candidate for attorney general. I want to turn our attention a little bit to the presidential race. And most of your work, I know now, is done at the state level, as it is mine. And but could you comment a little bit on, discuss how the impact of the presidency and who is president would actually have on your state? And we'll start with you, Jonathan, in New York. What are your thoughts about that?
Sure. I'd say the largest impact that the President Trump's administration has had on our state had to do with the 2017 tax cuts. And there was a provision in there known as SALT, which is a state and local tax relief. And previous to that, our residents were able to enjoy some large tax and saving incentives. And now that's now limited under the new Trump plan. So it's really accelerated the tax rate in New York, and now New Yorkers are paying even further tax in the form of state and local. And our governor's been beating the drum for the past several months that any further stimulus needs to address that, because it's really causing a lot of problems. The administration's been a little reluctant to address the issue, but Chuck Schumer, the minority leader of the Senate, has made it a priority for him, and he certainly has a seat at the table. Additionally, it was nice to see the administration and our state governor's administration work together in the early days of COVID for the New York City response and getting the PPE and the appropriate hospital care to the infected. So they work together when they need to. They're obviously having some disagreements now, but we'd really like to see the next round of stimulus address state and local taxes.
And of course, Alexis, you face a little bit different environment in Arizona between your governor and the president. The governor and your governor, Doug Ducey, and the president are of the same party. And so what do you see as the impact on the presidency on your state?
Well, let me take just a minute, Steve, to tell you a little bit about the political background of our state, and that'll put it in context. So Arizona has been predominantly a Republican state since the early 60s. And for 60 plus years, the House of Representatives, for example, in Arizona, has only been Republican. Barry Goldwater ran for president of the United States, as some of you may remember, in 1964. And although he didn't win, he put his handprint on the conservative ideology of the Republican Party. So it was surprising in the last election that Arizona actually voted for Hillary Clinton, given that we're such a traditionally Republican state. So our current governor, as you mentioned, Doug Ducey, is a Republican, and he is very close personal friends with Vice President Pence, and also very close to the president. In terms of how the president's who is in office affects the state, President Trump has actually helped a lot of the industries in Arizona. We have a big mining industry here. We have agriculture. He's helped and he's hurt on both sides. On the one hand, he has deregulated quite a bit. There have been fewer environmental laws. In fact, if anything, there's been an unwinding of many of those. So from that perspective, the mining industry has done well, and other industries, energy-related industries. Conversely, we're a border state. And so, and we depend on Mexico and Latin America. We have, as much of the country has, but particularly Arizona, for labor to come in and do construction, to work in restaurants, all kinds of agriculture, just a variety of things. When President Trump decided to build the wall, and also created some issues, tensions between the president of Mexico and the United States, it created a lot of difficulty for trade with Mexico, and that is our biggest trading partner for Arizona. So those policies have adversely affected the state. whereas other ones have positively affected it. Now, the latest US MCA, which replaced NAFTA, which creates facilitates trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, that has been largely positive for our state because we have a strong infrastructure and can take advantage of that international trade. So that is another area where it's been extremely positive. But by and large, if the presidency should change and we find that President Biden, Vice President Biden becomes president, then we would see a shift in all of that, and suddenly we would have a lot more regulation in terms of climate control and environment, and hope, which could negatively affect us, but conversely, it would be helpful to have an improved relationship with Mexico and certainly some kind of solutions to immigration problems.
Yeah. Well, we all are aware of that immigration problem, particularly in the southwest part of the state. I know in Ohio we have a different concern about immigration. It's not really necessarily the folks coming from the south, but it might be folks coming from the east and actually southern Asia that are looking to come to locate into Ohio, and it's more difficult for them to do that now. It's been a real struggle. But look, going on from the impact of the presidency to actually electing a president, we're looking at election day here in November. There are a lot of curveballs that we've seen recently in terms of the first debate. The president and Mrs. Trump's diagnosis with the coronavirus for the viewers was just announced this morning. But looking at election day, how do you think it's going to unfold nationally and also in your state? Jonathan, we'll start with you.
I think one of the biggest trends that we'll see this year compared to previous years is a much larger increase in mail-in ballots and absentee voting. Here in New York, there's 3 different ways that you can cast a vote in the presidential election. You can do it in person, you can do it via absentee vote, or you can do it by mail-in vote that will be opened up on October 24th until November 1st. So this year, we're expecting to see something between 30 to 40% of the vote come in by mail or other than in-person voting on November 3rd. We've already seen some allegations in New York City last week where the Board of Elections sent 100,000 ballots out that were incorrect addresses and incorrect return dates. So the president's been banging that drum and trying to shed some light on the issue of mail-in votes, but we expect that to see one of the major areas where it will be much different than previous years. So we're paying a close attention to that, and we want to see if there's any litigation that could be brought against it. And so far it's been quiet, but we all know that that could easily change given the results.
And that's so interesting to hear your deadlines for counting votes and receiving votes. In Ohio, it's different, where we will be able to, as long as a mail-in ballot has been postmarked prior to election day, we give it 10 days beyond election day to arrive and be counted. So different timelines for different states. Of course, what we're really talking about is, we have a sort of a hybrid system of electing a president. Unlike every other election that we hold in this country, with every other election, we have a process where it's whoever gets the most number of votes, from the voters, just they tally it all together, wins. But we of course have our Electoral College, and that's a little different, isn't it, Alexis?
Yes, that is one aspect that's critical to understanding the presidential election in the United States. The Electoral College was created at the time the Constitution was established, and basically what it was intended to do was to make sure that states with smaller populations would have an equal ability to elect the president. So they designed a system where every state, based on the census, the last census that's taken of population, receives so many delegates to go, congressional delegates. So for example, in Arizona, we have a total of 11 electoral votes. And what happens in each state, and it's different by each state, but people are elected or they're appointed. They can be elected by their party. They can be appointed by the governor, appointed by their party. It varies across the country. But each state establishes who will actually vote for that congressional district. And some states have adopted laws that state that that person cannot change the vote. For example, if the state voted for Trump, then those electoral votes must go towards Trump. But other states don't have that, and their electoral delegates can actually change the vote. To date, that's never changed an election, but it's an interesting aspect. So larger states, for example, we have 11 larger states like California and New York have 55 and 29 electoral votes respectively. So you can see the difference. It is based on population, but it's to create a more even playing field for those smaller states. And interestingly, to win the electoral vote, you have to have a candidate has to have at least 270. So it's possible that somebody can win the popular vote and lose in the electoral, which happened 4 years ago when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the electoral vote.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, if somehow there's not a conclusive vote, I mean, it's possible that the electors from states may actually not choose someone because their state is in such disarray. Then, of course, ultimately that voting responsibility then goes to the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives, and that's a very different process because it's not the representatives that get a vote. Every state delegation gets one vote. And so you're in a situation where you're trying to win a majority of the state's delegations. So presumably there are 50 votes, and that would be cast in that case. So very odd process it has. We certainly hope that we'll see some resolution of this prior to it needing to go to the House of Representatives. Let's take a look at some other issues that are at stake with the presidential election. I want to kind of focus a little bit on trade. You did touch on it a little bit, Alexis, but there are significant. There's a significant level of tariffs that have been imposed by the Trump administration, particularly on Chinese businesses. Alexis, are you seeing any of the impact of that in Arizona and Arizona businesses?
Surprisingly, we really are. Arizona has become increasingly a place to manufacture fabs. Intel has had several plants here for many years. We don't have any earthquakes or hurricanes or other things that could cause problems. So we're a good location to put them. And we've had Taiwanese companies looking at Arizona. For example, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, has been meeting with the state and is considering building some fab plants here. The real issue comes down to Trump is, as you know, imposed really strong export controls on China. And as a result of that, there's been a contraction of their own companies. Very large companies like Huawei are seriously being impacted by the loss of US sales. So although they get subsidies from the government to some extent, the contraction is significant. And if Trump is reelected, that type of thing will continue. You'll see continued tightening of export controls. On the other hand, so mainland China would prefer to see a Biden administration because they will loosen up those export controls and they'll allow them to come to the US. But the geopolitical factors in this change the landscape a little bit. It's about 30% more expensive to produce semiconductor chips in the US than it is in China or Taiwan. But the geopolitical interests could change that. So for example, TSMC they've just announced also they're going to build some more plants in Taiwan. They may rethink that strategy if Trump is elected, because then you've got China becomes more as their military grows. And part of that, some people would say, is as a reaction to the tightening economic controls on them from the US, that has even fortified more the desire to grow militarily. But that aspect makes Taiwan and Hong Kong more at risk than they would be otherwise. So from a supply chain management and from a capital standpoint, they may want to move some of their assets to the United States. So that's possible with a Trump election. With the Biden election, conversely, you're going to see people in Taiwan not necessarily feeling safer, but investments in China will be, they've always invested heavily in China. So you may see more capital flowing into China from Taiwan, but still a lingering concern that China's buildup militarily could negatively impact them. So in either way, with either president, there's pros and cons of what could happen for Taiwan and China.
Jonathan, I'd like you also to touch on the impact of trade on New York, but also if you could just discuss the impact of that we've seen in the financial services sector, which obviously is having Wall Street in the state of New York is very important. I mean, the perception outside of New York is that the tax reform package that was passed in the early part of the Trump administration with the Republican Congress was very, very helpful to Wall Street and the financial infrastructure supporting it. What are some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'll answer the first part of your question first. And as far as trade goes, where we've really seen an impact in New York is on our agricultural industry and our dairy farmers and how they've interacted with our friends north of the border in Canada and how some of the tariffs have impacted them. So that's really shaping up to be one of the central issues in some of our congressional races here in the North Country. And the farmers have struggled from it, and they've taken some pretty hard hits. So that issue is still unresolved, and it will still be front and center depending on whoever is in the White House in the next election. Turning to the impact on Wall Street, Wall Street's really been the economic engine of New York State for decades, if not centuries. So that's something that even today, as we saw President Trump and the First Lady test positive for COVID, that had some negative impacts on the markets. And right out of the gate, we saw the markets down multiple percentage points. It looks like they're starting to crawl back on it a little bit. But as we've seen over the past couple of weeks, the market's been very choppy and there's been up and down and a lot of volatility. And we kind of expect that that's going to continue throughout the election and have a lot of impact on the city of New York and so forth. And New York City is really struggling and really needs to get some stability out of Wall Street. We're seeing our schools return to session. We're seeing indoor dining beginning to occur in the city. So there's a lot of moving parts and still a lot of uncertainty as we head into the election. So some stability would be the best thing that we could see.
Well, yes, and obviously a smooth transition. I guess the last question I have about the presidential aspect of the election, we'll touch on other aspects of it as well later in our conversation, but I think that given some of the rhetoric that we've heard out of the president, there are concerns by some that if he were to lose the November election, that he wouldn't leave. Jonathan, what are your thoughts about that?
You know, I think that's Trump being Trump, if you will. And we all hope and would expect that if he is not successful in his election, that there will be a smooth transition of power, just as there ever has been in every election in the history of our democracy. But as we both know, both sides are lawyering up, and there could be potential recount litigation, similar to what we saw in 2000 versus Bush v. Gore in the state of Florida. However, that case has a limited precedent on our state because it had such narrow jurisdictional issues under the Constitution, which vests most of the power to the states to decide how the elections are handled. So we're paying close attention to it. I think the election lawyers are chomping at the bit to see how some of the recounts are going to go that are inevitable at this point. But it's really a race to 270, and we'll see how that goes within the Electoral College.
What are your thoughts about that, Alexis?
I think that's pretty accurate. I think that although, a lot of the political pundits are saying that whoever wins, there's going to be protests and there could be some issues, and that may happen. But in terms of the president leaving, I think the one caveat to him leaving quietly is he said in the debate this week that it could take weeks, if not months. It's going to go to the Supreme Court. And I think he really, and his recent announcement to nominate a new Supreme Court justice, that in addition, I mean, that just helps him in terms of if he was to have a case right before the Supreme Court deciding the election. And so that, I mean, that's an interesting twist to the whole thing, but I don't think he will, I don't think, they may not be dragging him out of the White House, but I think he will lawyer up, and he already has, and he's going to exhaust every single remedy. There was even a lawsuit in Arizona contesting whether or not ballots that are not properly signed, mail-in ballots, whether or not they could extend the date to sign them beyond the election. And a U.S. district judge just ruled about a week ago that in fact Arizona voters have until 5 o'clock, 5 days after the election, to go back and go down and sign their ballot. So there's a lot of things that are going to, I think, bring the courts into this one way or another. And so from that standpoint, it may not be quick moving. It may take up the remainder of his term in office.
And just to build on that a little bit, I think the recent Supreme Court case for the faithless elector also gives us a little bit more guidance and reassurance that any recount or recasting of ballots will be done quickly. In that case, which was decided recently, the Supreme Court noted that the states can impose mandates on their electors on how they have to vote, and it'll eliminate some of the issues that we saw on Bush v. Gore in 2000.
Very good. Absolutely. I believe we had one defector elector in the 2016 race, if I recall correctly. So that's good that they're able to curtail that and add predictability to the election process.
And that concludes part 1. Please continue on to part 2.